This is the High School Football Preview Show with Mike Wennmacher, Tim Schweizer, Steve Bridge, and Derek Parris on 97.7 and 970 WMAY, Springfield's news and talk.
Welcome in to another edition of the High School Football Preview Show, Week 4, and we got some great matchups. And of course, as always, we have a great panel. I'm Mike Wennmacher, joined by a gentleman you can hear on the SHG Cyclone broadcast, Tim Schweizer. Also, you can hear this next gentleman on the Rochester Rockets broadcast, Steve Bridge. And the final gentleman, you can see him and his staff pretty much at any sporting event involving high school sports throughout the area from Channel 1450. It's Derek Parris. And gentlemen, boy, do we have a great week this week. But before we get there, let's recap Week 3. Steve, we'll start with you and Rochester taking care of business against Lincoln.
Yep, took care of business. A fairly easy win, one that didn't require a whole lot of stress on the coaches or on the players. And it's a game that when it's scripted as planned, right? You get a big win, you get a running clock, you get a lot of some seniors that don't play a lot, some juniors, some sophomores sometime, and you just you take care of what was in front of you, which is to play a clean game without any injuries in the game, and you look forward to a really big matchup here that we have this weekend against Glenwood.
And I will echo those exact statements, pretty much word for word, Steve. Glenwood took care of Eisenhower. 65-6 was the final. I joked with Coach, followed 51-6 at halftime, and he was like, "Really, that was the score?" Same thing. You went through there clean. He was all about, making sure we're doing the right things, getting the details right, and he was very impressed with the way his team took care of business. The two big things to take away from that game, really, from a Glenwood standpoint, Colton Knadler becomes the all-time leading passer yardage-wise in school history, and also, Coach said over 80 guys got on the field in that game against Decatur Eisenhower. You mentioned it, Steve. Seniors who don't play much, the scout team guys, juniors, and some sophomores as well, gaining some valuable varsity experience. Tim, you had the closest game of Week 3, SHG getting that victory 55-20 over Jacksonville. I got to ask you, it seems like SHG is starting to find an identity offensively. They're running the ball pretty well.
Yeah, 2 straight weeks with better than 300 yards rushing. That's good. Scored 8 touchdowns at Jacksonville, 7 of them on the ground. Defensively, they only gave up 1 score to the Crimsons with the frontline defense in. Freshman Carlito Mitchell did score a couple of long touchdowns for Jacksonville when the game was already decided. So that final score is a little deceiving. The Cyclones really dominated that game.
And Derek, I want to mention real quick the Decatur MacArthur. In Week 1, we talked about our surprises, and none of us mentioned MacArthur. They get a victory over U-High. Just tell us a little bit about this MacArthur team so far this year.
Yeah, obviously they're 3-0, and that's a big step in the right direction for them after they missed the playoffs last year. And we didn't know a lot coming into the season. We knew they did have some pieces back. We see some things on Twitter about some guys getting, Division I offers, whether that be some DBs, some safeties. And that seems like it's always the case. It's just a matter of if they have the size up front. And, by all accounts, it seems like they do based on them competing and beating Springfield and now U-High back-to-back weeks by 1 point. It doesn't matter. They're 3-0 and they get that win at home over U-High in overtime. U-High comes down and scores after MacArthur scores, and then U-High decides to go for 2. MacArthur's defense gets to stop. So, a huge win for them. And now, obviously, they get the rivalry crosstown game this week where they can go to 4-0 before they really get into, seeing some of the top-tier teams in the CS8 division.
And that you bring up a great point, Derek. Getting to that 4th win before having to see the big dogs is so crucial when you're trying to make a playoff push, because this is such a tough conference here in the CS8. And there's such big games that we have on our airwaves on Woodward this week, this Friday night. So let's start with you, Tim. We got SHG and QND. I have to imagine after what happened last year, the Cyclones have had this one circled for a while.
Yeah, they lost at Quincy Notre Dame last year. QND's in the league for the first time, and they win by 30 over SHG and Quincy. So the Cyclones definitely got better after that game last season. They hope they're better to face QND this season. Quincy Notre Dame's given up 6 points in their first 3 games. Their defense is outstanding. They have a lot of skills. on the offensive side of the ball, 2 terrific wide receivers, a good quarterback in his first year as the full-time starter for QND. John Venfurlo is finding them, and he has 2 outstanding running backs in Oliver Triplett and Noah Benz. So they're going to give the Cyclones all they can handle. SHG and QND at Ken Leonard Field on Friday night should be fun to watch.
Who are you going to be looking for defensively for the Cyclones, Tim, then, when you talk about all those weapons from QND? What are you looking from the Cyclones defensively to try to combat that?
Well, one thing Sacred Heart Griffin has to do, they're outsized on the perimeter in the pass game because their DBs aren't anywhere near 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", which are the wideouts for QND. They're going to have to do a lot of stay in your lane, be aware of where the guys are, and as soon as QND gets in the open field or gets a pass out, you need to have 2 DBs on the guy that's the intended receiver, and you need to gang tackle because Quincy Notre Dame was no problem getting through all the efforts of Southeast on a hot Saturday afternoon last weekend. They were really good.
Derek, you've been able to talk with both sides of this game coming up. What are some of the things you've heard in your talks with the coaches and some of the players that stands out to you for this matchup?
Yeah, coaches will always tell you that the games are won up front, whether that be offensive or defensive line. And one thing that stood out to me was this week I stopped out in Jacksonville to talk with Coach Grounds and a couple of the players just kind of about their season so far. And obviously coming off the loss to SHG, Coach Grounds was really emphasized the fact how physical SHG was and just how big and strong they were up front. Kind of referenced it to the old SHG teams to where, man, they just beat you down up front. And that was a big reason why Coach Grounds believed that they kind of lost that game. And so I'm really excited to see that aspect of the game, SHG QND, because when we went over there for practice at the beginning of the season, QND had a lot of good size to where just in practice, they were competing against each other, line versus line, and it was fun to see them go at it. And when you have a coach like Jack Cornell, who is kind of that sort of a guy, it seems like, where he's going to encourage those guys up front, you're really excited to see that matchup. And then on the outsides, where you get Western Illinois commit Gavin Dolman against guys like Drew Ward, and then Mikey Gresh on the linebacking core. I mean, it's going to be an exciting matchup to where this game can go either way, and really excited to see how it goes because like Tim mentioned, QND has given up 6 points all year long, and that was with 3 seconds left in the game when obviously their first team defense was not in that game. So defense might be the story in this one that we're not talking about enough in terms of, there might not be a lot of points scored. It's going to be a defensive battle and a big physical one.
Tim, before we move on to the Rochester-Glenwood game, what would a victory for SHG mean? Because, it's not been your typical SHG seasons the past couple seasons, but a win like this, what does it do for the morale of the team going forward?
Their head-to-head early in the conference season last year at Quincy, Mike, decided the conference championship in the West. It'll be probably the conference championship game in the West of the CS8 on Friday night at Ken Leonard Field.
Besides that QND SHG game, we also have Rochester versus Glenwood. And Derek, you brought up a good point last week. And Steve, I want to ask you this. With the way that Glenwood can pressure you defensively and Tanner Beal being so important defensively for Rochester, how often do you think you'll see him at the quarterback position in this football game against Glenwood?
Boy, good question. I don't really know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that Rochester just knows the answer to that yet. Too, I was today had a conversation with head coach Derek Leonard in our work to get ready for the game, and I asked him specifically there, Mike, if his play calling had evolved a little bit over the last couple of weeks as you get here at all of a sudden week 4 of the season. He's like, yeah, you start to learn a little bit more about your team. You think you know some things going into it, but then you start to become aware of really what the truth of it is. And 4 weeks into it, after 2 really big tests too early against Gibson Southern and Mount Zion, this Rochester team probably knows a lot more about itself than it did 3 or 4 weeks ago. So I think what we're going to do is learn a lot about what Rochester continues to think about itself, especially offensively, about what the play calling can be, will be, the way to maximize the use of both of those quarterbacks in Beal and Leonard. And, this goes without saying, but we can tell you the answer to that question, Mike, a whole lot easier after the game than we can tell it to you right now, because it will be something everybody's going to be watching. It's just how Rochester wants to get moving offensively against a Glenwood defense that is as fast and as deep as they have seen in a long, long time.
Well, let me ask you, what is really standing out to you? What do you think is going to be a thing you're focusing on in the broadcast that really may kind of move the needle one way or the other in this football game?
I want to see if Rochester is going to control the clock and use the run game to their advantage the way they did against Mount Zion, because that was a Caden Stout game with 300 yards rushing, and the offensive line in particular in the second half really started to exert their will because of depth and because of skill and force on Mount Zion. And I think this can be a year where some of the identity of the Rochester Rockets is not necessarily, they're not going to try not to score in a minute and a half, but if they wanted to score over a 4 or 5 or 6 minute drive, then they would be able to do just that, Mike. And with this Glenwood team being pretty explosive itself on the offense, with Blake Lanen and with others out there, right, able to really stretch the field and go fast and go long for those touchdowns, maybe Rochester is going to try to slow things down just a little bit and see how long they can hold the ball as they make their drives for possible touchdowns there on Friday night. That would be one thing I'd be watching for, just to see if that's a game plan or not.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, the physicality, because talking with Coach Hay earlier today, the word that kept coming up was physicality and execution. And I even tried to ask him, what's the challenge as a defensive coordinator when you go up against the Rochester team? There's motion, there's window dressing. And he said, hey, let's cut right to the chase. It's about how well they execute. It's about how strong they are up front. It's about how well disciplined they are. The other stuff we can make adjustments to. A guy goes in motion, you can adjust to that. But it's the strength in which they play and the physicality that we have to match that really is what Coach Hay was saying is something he's instilling on his players this week. And so I think you hit something right there, Steve. This may be a who can control the clock. Grady Mueller, I think, is going to be a big X factor in this game for the Glenwood Titans of, if you get a lead late in this game, do you have the horses up front and the horses in the backfield to maybe run out that clock and do that 4-minute offense, despite the fact that you are explosive on that side of the ball for both teams? And I think that may end up being the difference in this football game. Derek, you've talked to both sides. What have you gleaned from those interviews that you guys have done for Channel 1450?
Yeah, you did kind of just touch on, first thing I wanted to mention was through 3 weeks of the season and the stats that we get, this game features the two leading rushers, Grady Mueller, and Caden Stout, to where those guys have both had monster games and performed well. They both give credit to their offensive lines. So that's going to be something to see. Is will those guys be the feature, or will it be the matchups on the outside? Obviously, we've heard about Colton Knadler and what he's capable of throwing, breaking the passing records. But the speed, to me, on this turf, what's the speed going to look like? Whether that be Blake Lanen, whether that be Tristan Stanton, whether that be the Gregories, whether that be Andrew Schwartz. There's a lot of great athletes. Dylan Huff. I mean, the list could go on and on. But the speed on this turf is something to definitely watch and see how many deep shots they take, or like you said, do they control the clock a little bit? Also something to watch, that maybe hasn't been brought up, is that surface and how people adjust to it, because it is something that obviously Rochester's played 2 games on it now, but it's something that you can see it takes a little bit of getting used to. So I look for Glenwood to get out there early on Friday night and make sure that they're used to that and have the right footwear and understand that, it's not grass. It's not necessarily quite the same turf. And so that's something to keep an eye on. And finally, just kind of the defensive ends. I'm excited to see that because, Connor Broughton and Xander Bridge have been in the backfield a lot for Rochester. And we've seen the same thing on the Glenwood side with their defensive front. So just, it's going to be a great game and a great atmosphere. So I'm just really excited and can't wait to get out there.
Steve, Derek brings up the new surface. You forget about, the kind of newly remodeled Rocket Booster Stadium. What have you seen from the Rockets getting acclimated to this new surface?
Yeah, it's a different type of artificial surface. It's not that field turf where you see the little black granules pop up and move. And if you ever walked on one of those, there's actual kind of real-ish blades of grass that your cleats kind of dig into and help you kind of cut back and forth. So it's almost more like a carpet than it is a turf. It's still a whole lot softer than that old AstroTurf that people remember from a long time ago. But there is a learning curve. And in that Gibson Southern game, both some Rocket players and a lot of players from Gibson Southern were slipping a little bit, and so it takes some getting used to. Your weight balance needs to shift just a little bit differently. So it might be a bit of a home field advantage for the Rockets there to welcome in Chatham, who's never played on that surface, and now Chatham is one of the very few schools in the Central State 8 that even plays regularly on a grass field. Right? I mean, them in Southeast and Jacksonville are the schools off the top of my head, and Eisenhower, I think, that even just regularly play on grass. So maybe now being at grass is going to leave you to be like, wait a second, how do we adjust the artificial surface?
Right. Yeah, exactly. We maybe have to join the 21st century of football, and we got to get turf in there as well. One last thing I will mention about the Glenwood-Rochester game that I talked to Coach about is just having the veteran players, all those seniors. It's such a raucous environment, right? But these guys have kind of been there, done that. And while it may play more than likely there'll be one or two false starts because of the noise there at Rocket Booster Stadium. Coach Hay is pretty confident that his group will be able to kind of weather that storm and kind of get settled in and not be as flustered as some younger teams in the past may have been as they head into Rocket Booster Stadium. So we're very excited for these games. Quickly, before we give you where you can find all of them, Derek, you want to mention a Sangamo contest real quick for people to watch?
Yeah, obviously these two big games in the Central State 8, but there's a big one in the Sangamo this week with Athens going to Olympia. Olympia 3-0 and Athens 2-1. Obviously Athens didn't have a great season last year, and they look to be kind of back to where they've been. And so this is always one where, yeah, Maroa and Williamsville seem to be at the top of the conference, but this is the conversation where which tier are these two teams in? Are they up there with them, or are they right behind them? So definitely one to keep an eye on, and we'll definitely have highlights and stuff from the Athens at Olympia game this week.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me as always here on the High School Football Preview Show. As we wrap things up, Tim, where can people find the SHG QND game?
Sports Radio 1450 AM, 92.3 FM on the Sports Radio 1450 mobile app and at sportsradio1450.com.
Steve, the Rochester broadcast?
Chris McLeod and I will be on 97.7 FM and streaming on the WMAY app.
And for the Glenwood broadcast, Ryan Fantozzi and Coach Dan Rourke will be on 970 AM and also on the WMAY app and online. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. Best of luck this Friday night. Always a spirited contest for sure. And look forward to talking about all the results next week on the High School Football Preview Show.
Catch the High School Football Preview Show live every Friday night at 6 on 97.7 and 970 WMAY. Listen to the podcast and watch the replay online at WMAY.com.